Okay, welcome to the digital photography course. Everything we do is uploaded onto Google Classroom either before or afterwards, and you'll be sent an invite to join the Google Classroom so that you can do it from home. Quite easy to do, especially if you've got a Gmail account. If you've got Hotmail and Yahoo, it can be a bit more difficult. Or the alternative solution is either to use your college email address to log in, or use yourself a Gmail which you've created especially for this and other courses. The course covers the following content, so we look particularly this week and the final week at the various facilities of the digital camera, and holistically, these sort of things sort of come up in conversations during the course itself. So it's a good sort of environment to learn techniques from other people as well as from myself, hopefully. We'll be taking some better photographs, but in a minute we'll be looking at some composition techniques which you can use and keep in your forefront of your mind when taking photographs and understanding the basic sort of composition rules of photography. We'll be looking at downloading. We're having a brief conversation. We've probably had a brief conversation about downloading. Most people don't need to download anymore. You tend to, for example, if you use your smartphone for your photography, it tends to be uploading onto the cloud automatically. And if you use your phone, if you use your camera, you'll probably find that your cameras, these modern cameras, do tend to have links via Bluetooth or by Wi-Fi to download, even upload onto cloud storage. So all these new technologies are quite advanced on modern cameras. If you do need to download, obviously we might have a discussion when it comes to that with using leads or taking the memory chip out and uploading it via a card reader. And then, of course, the main part of the course, which you'll see on the next slide, is actually about manipulating images. We're going to use a piece of software called GIMP for that. So sharing images is also quite often referred to and thought about as part of the course content. Printing is probably not the most common thing to do with print photographs anymore. We don't tend to print very much when it comes to photographs, but you do tend to share them quite a lot through social media, i.e. digitally, rather than through printed media. So this is the layout for the course. So week one, which is the week this video is intended for, we obviously had a quick introduction to the college itself. We dealt with health and safety, and then we looked at the information about using the camera, and then composition particularly was the main part of this course, which we'll get onto in just a minute in this PowerPoint. Week two, we're going to start looking at GIMP, and I'll talk about GIMP in a minute, and Photoshop and other alternatives you could use. Week three, we're looking at enhancing photographs by actually using techniques and tools which can actually, if you like, fake photographs, change photographs, have a completely different meaning to a photograph just by making certain compositional changes as well as changes within the photograph itself. We're going to have a further opportunity in week four to look at other tools and manipulation techniques in the software we use. And in the final week, we have what's called a project. And the project is where you bring your own photographs and make your own changes. So at which point you'll be confident and quite capable of using these various techniques we've looked at and enhanced, and you'll be able to use it on your own particular photographs. We do try and employ a sort of jargon-free zone when possible. If I do ever by accident or, assuming that you understand the terminology I'm using, if I do use any jargon you don't understand, then please stop me and just ask for clarification, and I'd be most grateful, because if you're thinking it, and probably everybody else in the group is also thinking it as well. It's a piece of jargon which is not clear. Right, we did look initially at the various sorts of, when to use auto and when to use manual. And as I always say, I'm a great lover of using auto. I think there's some sort of maybe snobbery, or maybe just people feel they need to be able to automatically, know what to do with the camera from a manual point of view. However, very often these things take quite a long time to set up manually, and when they are used manually, such as in the photographer's studio, they're used with a consistent sort of lighting and a consistent backdrop and a certain focal distance. So it's very easy to set the camera up and then have it perfect, but then know that no changes will be required. Whereas in the real world, it's very difficult to actually set up your camera manually and have those perfect shots. And because of the time restraints, it's sometimes better to leave your camera, I feel, on automatic and take the photographs quickly, knowing that you got those shots in the bag, than to lose the opportunity. But, it is a good discussion, and it is a technique. And bear in mind, this course is not designed for people who just want to learn photography. It's mainly designed for people who take photography as a starting point and learn to manipulate their photographs and enhance them further. Excuse me. So we looked at the exposure wheel. The exposure triangle. So aperture, shutter, and ISO, which I won't go through again because there's a separate video already on Google Classroom which explains it quite fully and a lot more detail. So you never take a perfect picture, and as I say, if you ask a lot of professional photographers about when they took a perfect picture, very few will ever claim they took a perfect picture because it's a very difficult thing to do. It's very much a case of changing and manipulating the photograph afterwards, but you can make the perfect picture. So you never, you never take that perfect picture, but you can definitely make a perfect picture. So what is a perfect picture? Well, technically, a perfect picture is actually a photograph which comprises of all the various colours available. Now, most people always think, what are you talking about? Because when I look at a picture, it doesn't have maybe this picture I'm looking at here, or the Liver buildings doesn't have any red. Well, there will be elements which incorporate those particular colours which you're not even aware of, which will be mixed with other colours. And there will be obviously certain colours which are a lot more, used within any individual picture. So here we can see there's a lot of blue, there's a lot of sort of the greyish sort of colours. There might be quite an element of black. So, there are certain colours you can visually see, but technically all photographs tend to use an element of every single part of the spectrum of colour. So that's technically a colour, but that really isn't meaningful. It doesn't mean much to us as humans. What we really think about as a photograph being a perfect photograph is a photograph that actually tells a story. That's what we really mean as a photograph. So when you ask somebody what's the best photograph they've ever seen, they're not talking about a photograph which technically is a perfect photograph, which they may not even be able to check unless they've got computer software. They're talking about what is artistically a perfect photograph. And it's artistically because it's something they remember, because they're not really remembering the photograph itself. They're remembering what comes with the photograph, the story that their mind developed from that particular photograph. So, story building is really a big part of admiring, using, conveying with photographs, developing this technique of being able to use photographs. And if you think of how photographs are used, for example, newspapers use photographs, websites use photographs to convey a message. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about using this ability to be able to convey a message with a particular photograph. So, to be able to do that, you need really to be able to compose photographs in such a way that they actually make the viewer look longer at the actual photograph. And it's really like a stop clock. The longer people look at photographs, the more interesting that photograph appears to be to them. Okay, so it's a simple set of rules will help you. So we're going to start off with probably the grandfather of all rules, which is universally referred to as the rule of thirds, because very often rules after this have very many different names depending on who's referring to it, and different people have their own names for some of the rules. But rule of thirds is very much a common rule, and possibly the only common rule anybody knows of any composition technique, which is to take the focus of the picture away from the center and to break the framing of the actual picture into threes, either both horizontally and vertically. So in other words, you end up with like the equivalent to 9 squares or 9 regions of the photograph. And by doing this, you're removing the opportunity of the brain when it first looks at the photograph, which always, most, if not all human beings, look in the center of the photograph. We're looking for the subject. We're looking for the thing that has meaning within the photograph. And if it's not within the center, then you're forcing the person to start looking through the photograph to find what is that photograph about. And by doing that, we're extending the period of time they're looking, and we're starting the clock. We're making sure that people start to develop an appreciation of your photograph by simply extending the period of time they're looking. So let's have an example of this very important rule indeed. So there is possibly the most boring picture in the world. We've got some sort of rock formation pretty well in the center of the page, going through the very center. Really doesn't convey much. There's a little bit of definition within the clouds within the sky, and it's interesting to view in some regards, but it can be better. It can be made better. And if I just put the grid lines up there, you can see that obviously that's just confirming that what we're using is we're putting the composition right through the center, the subject or the matter which people should be looking right through the center, and therefore the brain isn't looking elsewhere. It's pretty well found what it's looking for, and it doesn't look elsewhere, and therefore there's no sort of extended, interrogating what's actually going on in the photograph. Whereas this simple change, actually, with it, that's very basic photograph makes a big difference. It makes you view more of the photograph. You're probably seeing the sky a lot more. You're probably trying to get an idea of what the photograph is. You're possibly making some sort of story up to looking at the photograph. You're wondering if there's been some sort of, plane display where you've had a fleet of fighter jets or something go over, and they've all gone in different directions and left these cloud formations, or is there something else going on? You're wondering why. What's going on the sand. You're starting to develop, as I say, a sort of story in your brain just by the fact that your brain can no longer see the actual subject or can't figure out instantly what the subject is because it's not in the center. Here's an example of, and it's used a lot in very many forms, from from movie making, actually, from videos. And there's videos on the Google Classroom you can have a look at and see how they use these basic rules as well, to advertising and every type of photography you can ever imagine. And the only photography that doesn't use this rule, which breaks the rule, is portrait photography, where you tend to do the opposite. You tend to remove the background completely, and you just want a white wall or something backdropped, and then you want the actual subject in the center, making it a focal point and the only thing people look at. Well, here's an example. We've taken the dog, we've taken them off center, and you can see just by taking the dog, put them off center, it's developing a bit of a story. We've also branded it. We're putting the logo on the top right corner and things like this. And not only is the rule of thirds a good rule to use in photography, simple rules like the use of colour. It can be really important to use colour. Being aware of colours, for example, sometimes colours can distract from what you really want the viewer to look at within a photograph. So you have to be conscious of colour. And, you can see some examples here. So this picture here, you probably almost feel yourself being drawn, almost like walking through this tunnel. And the colours themselves are being used to compel you to look at the photograph, to try and figure out what the meaning of these colours are and why this tunnel exists. And, you can use colour. You can desaturate colours in the background, for example, to make that part less interesting and enhance the colours, or just leave naturally the original colours within the area you want the viewer to look at, to actually make them develop this interest in what exactly is going on within this particular photograph. Another example of compelling people is what we often call the line of perspective, or leading lines. And leading lines, a line of perspective, is a way of using straight or straightish lines of some sort, or corresponding lines like railway lines or motorway tracks, to force or compel the viewer to look at the photograph in a structured way, which you have some sort of, if you like, power, but hopefully you wouldn't use it too much, but a control on to be able to develop a technique to make the photograph more compelling to the viewer. So here's a straightforward example. So we've got the railings which are going inwards, and obviously that goes then to the couple at the end of the pier. And it's a straightforward composition technique. Notice again, using the rule of thirds, we've used everything in the bottom quarter, so keeping it there, so there's a lot of detail in the sky, which might also attract the viewer. And it doesn't have to be straight lines. It can be a corresponding sequence of things, such as these seats. So when I look at this photograph of the front of the seats, you might look at the arching part or the very back, or you might even be looking at the railings or the lampposts. But there will be something, even the flooring, there will be something which pushes you to look along. And everyone looks different, and I mean, we do talk about this in session. Every single person looks at photographs completely different, so you'll never have two people who completely agree that this photograph is the best photograph because of whatever reason. Everyone has their own method of looking at photographs based on our basic chemistry, our mental chemistry, if you want to, our brain chemistry, should I say, based on things like if you're left or you're right-handed, based on things of how you develop these techniques in early life. Everyone has their own different technique of looking at photographs. Even these sorts of photographs. Now, everyone is different. I've had people say that they're looking at the brick wall, and the brick wall is what the leading line to line of perspective is. I generally find the right-hand side of the boat sort of arcs me across towards the house, or even the lighthouse, and forces you, like a football being curved to the left. So that's another example of a simple rule. And of course, many times you might take a series of photographs, and only the best one, the one which works best for you, is probably the one you're going to use. So bear that in mind. Maybe the unwritten rule of photography is never just take single photographs. Always feel free to take a lot of photographs and decide yourself in post-production which is the best. Once you've got those photographs looking as good as they are, and then you can sort of decide which are the best to keep and use in future. And there's not just 3 or 4 rules. There are probably hundreds of rules, but there's certainly, a good selection of rules out there. And you can often get sort of publications and articles talking about, for example, the 8 rules of composition. Well, yeah, there are lots of other rules, and there's lots of rules which are shared not only in photography, but in cinematography and, in the art world, in oil paintings, and all these techniques have developed together to form a very much a sort of a way of developing a simple set of rules. And of course, what you have to always consider is that it's not always that you use the same rules. You mix and match, and occasionally you break the rules. The rule of thirds itself, you can often break the rules to give you stunning effects. So you need to decide, and if the opportunity arises, use a variety of different composition techniques to try and find the best results for each particular setting and each time you're taking a photograph. Try it in many different ways, and it will develop a muscle memory over time of your particular style. And again, everyone is different. Nobody will have a de facto perfect way of doing any particular type of photography. May that be sort of landscape photography, photographing animals, children, portrait photography, whichever your style of particular photography is, you will develop your own individual techniques, and you develop a love for that particular area of photography. So photography uses a set of rules, and it's only a guide, and it gives you best practice, and it's a way of making things quicker and easier for you, using a set of simple rules to give you a starting point. As I say, from that you can progress and develop individual changes for each and every setting. Okay, now programs, computer programs. Now GIMP is the program we're going to use in session, and the reason I use GIMP, even though we have complete and utter access in college to use Photoshop, is because it's not free for you guys to use at home. And I actually quite like GIMP. I've been using GIMP now over 25 years, and I found GIMP is a particularly good alternative and free, you know, digital, image manipulation application, which can pretty well do the same as Photoshop. And I know people get very sort of, very loyal to, Photoshop, and then fine. I mean, the price I've got here, and I'm aware of, since gone up as well. So there is a big difference, obviously, in costings. I mean, I think the price have gone up maybe to about £25 a month, or nearly closer to £400 plus for Photoshop a year, which obviously is for the rest of your life. I mean, if you're using it for 10 years, that's £4,000 you spent on Photoshop, whereas GIMP's always going to be free. And there's plenty of alternative free and open source image manipulation programs, which are designed for various sorts of different uses, and some are better for digital photography, some are better for animation, and more commercial, sign making, logos, but absolutely, GIMP will give you a good sample of all the various things you can do with image manipulation. So let's look at what we're going to be covering in the next few weeks. Now, this just to give you an example. I don't want to go into too much details because you might get a bit frightened, and it actually is a lot easier to do practically than it is to talk about in reality. So we're going to start off straight away with what's called leveling. Now, leveling is the best and the correct way of making a photograph, is enhancing it to its fullest extent. So photographs could be maybe too dark, too light, and people might talk about things like brightness, contrast, but those sort of things will change every pixel within the photograph, every pixel becoming darker, becoming lighter. Whereas when we're leveling a photograph, we're actually enhancing the photograph pixel by pixel. It happens so quick you can't see it, but each and every pixel will be changed so that it's actually perfectly brighter or perfectly dark, or maybe might just be changed or left the same, may not be changed at all, or very slightly changed. And that will give you the best starting point to view your photograph. So when you do take a large series of photographs, before you view them and decide which are the best, level them all equally, figure out, a baseline, which we'll talk about in the second session, and actually but then have a look at those individual photographs and decide which ones you do wish to keep and which ones you don't. So it's a starting point even before selecting, which are the, or filtering out the better photographs from a series of shots. And another thing we'll be doing in either the first or the second week onwards is we'll be looking at cloning. Now, cloning is often given other names like stamping and healing brush and so on, named after the various tools and techniques. But here's an example. On the left, there's a photograph of a chimney breast, and it's nice. It's ruined a little bit with a few little details, like, for example, the aerial and the foam wires. So we've used cloning technique to actually paint out these individual bits by using other parts of, in this case, the same picture. So you can actually clone by painting in something from a different picture, but keeping it simple for the first part of the course, we're actually using different parts of the same picture to remove part of it or element of it within the picture. So, things like, say, aerial and what have you. Here we've removed the van, we removed the police vehicle at the back. We may have removed some of the people to make it look clearer, and to give you just a slightly better version of the photograph. Because if you think of an Italian piazza, you might be thinking of it being, practically just you being there. In reality, there are probably hundreds of people there. So it's nice to be able to make those small little selections and improvements. Likewise, you've probably seen in the fashion industry, they use these techniques to enhance by removing any sort of blemishes within the skin, by painting them over basically with other parts of the same person, from different parts of their face. So So that's what we looked at for the first week, and giving a really good sort of summation of what we're going to be sort of covering over the next 4 weeks. So we are going to be using GIMP, as I say, and I think you'll get to like GIMP. And we'll be over in the next week or two. We'll be looking at leveling and cloning, obviously. And I keep reminding you this: if I do use any sort of terminology or jargon which you're not familiar with, please just feel free to stop me. I'm not going to be upset about it. Please stop me and just say, I don't really understand what you're saying there, or just let me, give me the opportunity to recap rather than let me move on. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, so we'll see you next week, and hope you enjoyed it all.